Alright, so today we have just a general review of rounding. And when you're rounding numbers, your goal is to get friendly numbers. So your goal to get friendly numbers. Well, what kind of numbers are friendly? Okay, so examples of friendly numbers are what I call 10 pairs. Okay, 1 and 9, 8 and 2, 7 and 3, 6 and 4, and then of course a double 5, because all of those add up to 10. Okay. Another kind of friendly number are quarters. 25, 50, 75, $1. Okay. But it keeps working, right? 250 and 350 and 475 and 125. Like anything that ends in one of these quarter numbers, it's a pretty friendly number. Okay. Multiples of 10. So that was anything with ends in a 0. So 10, 50, 300, 4,000. Just anything that ends with a 0. So rounding and estimating, your goal is to get some friendly numbers. And usually when we think about rounding, we think about finding multiples of 10. Okay. So I'm just going to give you some tips on how to get those. Okay, and I'm going to start big and go small. Okay, so I'm going to start with a number like with rounding to the nearest 1,000. Okay. And because we've recently been doing decimals, I want you to notice that I said 1,000, not thousandths. So let's say my number is 4,362. Okay, so I'm rounding to the nearest 1,000. Okay, and there are lots of tips and tricks, and you look at the number to the side, but if you're watching this video and you're still kind of trying to wrap your head around rounding at this point, I'm just going to say that I think you probably need to see it on a number line. Okay, so if you're rounding to the nearest 1,000, okay, 1,000, then what you're going to look at is the 1,000. Okay, and that's how I know to put a 4,000 right here, because my number line is going to start with the 1,000 I'm rounding to. And then I ask myself, what 1,000 comes after 4,000? Well, my answer is 5,000. Okay. My next question is, what's my midpoint? And my midpoint always has a 5 in it somewhere. Okay. And the real question is, where's the 5? And the 5's going to be wherever the first 0 was, the 0 closest to the digit that started this all. So in between 4,000 and 5,000 is 4,500. Okay? So now I ask myself, my number, 4,362, which side of my number line is that on? Well, 4,300, so let's see, this is 4,000, so we'd have 4,100, 4,200, 4,300, 4,400. So I said 4,300 right about here. My number's just a little bit off from that. And so there's my number. Okay. Now, the only other tricky part is this may be closer to my midpoint, but I'm not worried about that. I want to know which end it's closest to. So this one is closest to this end. So to the nearest 1,000, 4,362 rounds to 4,000. Okay? So now let's try a slightly smaller number. Okay. Let's try rounding to the nearest, okay, 10. Okay, and I skipped 100 because, you know, I feel like this is a little bit of a review. I feel like I can move you along. Okay, so I'm going to make another number line. And I'm actually going to do the same number. I'm going to do 4,362. And we're going to round this to the nearest 10. Okay, so I'm looking at the tens place. And I've got to keep everything that's over here to the left of the tens place. So right here, either side of my number line, 4,360. Okay, so because the 10 that's right before my number is 4,360. And then I ask myself, which 10 comes after 4,360? Well, that would be 4,370. Right? And then what's in the middle? Whatever's in the middle is going to have a 5 in it. Just always does. So, and the 5 takes the place of the 0 closest to the other digits. Or you can just think through it. 4,360, 4,370. What's going to be in between? 4,365. Okay, so now where's my number? Well, here's 4,361, 4,362, 4,363. I made these too close together. I don't think I have an eraser. I'm just going to move them over a little bit. I'll try. Not really. Okay, so I'm just going to make some darker marks. Okay, 4,361, 4,362, 4,363, 4,364. Okay, so here was 4,362. And remember, we don't care if it's closer to here, we want which end. And this one rounds to here. Okay, so this keeps working when I'm dealing with decimals. Okay, so I'm actually going to have to work on the back of my page. If you still have room on the front of your page, you're fine. But now I'm going to round to the nearest tenth. Okay, all right. And I'm going to do this with two different numbers. I'm going to do it with a number that has a 0 in the ones place. So like the numbers we've done on some place value daily warm-ups. Okay. So I make my number line. And I'm looking for each end. So I'm rounding to the nearest tenth. So I'm looking at the tenths place. Okay. So that's how I know that I'm going to put 8/10 here. When I'm dealing with decimals, you know, I know that the thing that comes after 8 is 9. So the thing that comes after 8/10 is 9/10. Okay. Now here's the tricky part. You're probably not able to easily come up with the idea of a midpoint between 8 and 9. Like what's in between 8 and 9? You might know that it's 8.5, but how do you deal with that with decimals? So we go back to what we talked about how adding a 0 to the left of my decimal. Hold on, let me autofocus for you. Adding a 0, I'm sorry, I said the left, but adding a 0 to the right of my decimal does nothing to change the value of my number. 8/10 and 80/100 are the same. So now I've got 80 and 90. Well, it's halfway between 80 and 90. And again, you know, it's going to have a 5. So I think you know that 85 is going to be halfway between. But this number isn't really 80, it's 80/100. So I've got to make this one be 85/100. And now I look at my number, which has 84. So 81, 82, 83, 84, and then a little bit over. So there's my number. And which tenth is it closer to? It's closer to this one. And because I've been asked which tenth it's closest to, when I write it, I'm going to write 8/10. tenths as my answer. Okay, let's do 1 to the nearest tenth, where we have more numbers to the side. Okay, more numbers to the left. So let's do to the nearest tenth 42 and 17 hundredths. Okay, so I'm going to make my number line, and I'm looking at either end. Okay, and I'm still rounding to the nearest tenth, right? Tenth. So I'm looking at the tenths place. So up here, when I did the tenths place, I just had to worry about that 8. But did you notice I actually put the 0 point in front of it? So here I'm going to include all of this. Okay, and so what goes here is 42 and 1/10. So what comes after 42 and 1/10? Well, just like 9 came after 8, what comes after 1? 2. So we have a 1 in the tenths place here, so we're going to have a 2 in the tenths place here, and all of this up here is going to stay the same. So this is going to be 42 and 2/10. For the midpoint, you may have a hard time coming up with something in between these two numbers. You know it's going to have a 5 in it, and you know that adding a 0 to the end of a decimal does not change its value. And because this is 42 and this is 42, I can really focus right here. So it's halfway between 10 and 20. Okay, 15. But this isn't just 10 and 20. This is 42 and, so I've now got 42 and 15 hundredths. Okay, here's my 17, so 42 and 15, 42 and 16, 42 and 17 is right here, and then there's 18 and 19. Okay, so remember, we don't care if it's closer to the midpoint, we want to know which end it's closer to. So there you go. Okay. Now, for the last one, we're going to do round to the nearest hundredth. Okay, and we're going to do one of the numbers that has a 0 in the ones place, like we've been practicing. Autofocus. Okay, 486 thousandths. So I'm going to make my number line. I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth. So I'm looking at the hundredths place. And then that's how I know that when I go to this end, I'm looking here and then over. So what I'm going to put here is 48 hundredths. Okay, well, what's after 48? 49. What's halfway in the middle? Okay, you know it's going to have a 5 in it. And if you don't know what's halfway between 48 and 49, add that 0. So what's halfway between 480 and 490? 485. I can get an autofocus to go. Okay. So, but this isn't 480. This is 480 hundredths. I'm sorry, 480 thousandths. So that's what I'm going to make my number. And then what do I have here? A 6. So it's going to be right here to the side of 485 thousandths, so it is closer to 490 thousandths. Okay, last example, we'll do one with some digits to the left of the decimal. And there we go. Okay, so let's make our number line. We're looking for the nearest hundredth again, right? So here's the hundredths place. So when I'm picking what goes here, I look at all of this. So I have 153 and 34 hundredths. Okay. If I'm confused about what goes over here, let's just look at what's on one side of the decimal, 34. So I can put a 35 over here, but then this wasn't just 34. This is 153 and 34 hundredths. So this has to be 153 and 35 hundredths. What's my midpoint? It's going to have a 5 in it somewhere. If you're not sure, and again, you can just look at the very end part. If you're not sure what's in between 34 and 35, you're not changing the value by adding a 0 at the end. So now 340, 350. Okay, what's in between 340 and 350? 345. But my number isn't really just 345. It's 153 and 345 thousandths. And if you look at my number, it turns out that is my number. And whenever my number is the midpoint, I go ahead and round up. So this one rounds to 153. And I think I forgot to mention this over here, but when you're writing this, like to turn in, you take that 0 back off. So you would just write 153 and 35 hundredths. Up here, you would just write 49 hundredths. Okay, up here where I rounded to the nearest 10, I would just write, 42 and 2/10. Okay, so that's kind of where we are. So I'm going to turn back to the front. Okay. I've gotten requests to end my videos with kind of the whole screen, and I honestly can't get my whole screen in, but you have the power to pause. So you can get the top and the bottom from there. And then here's the top. And then here's the bottom. And within all of that, I'm sure you can see the whole thing. Thank you.